Okay, let's see here. What have been people's favorite videos so far? Ugh, that one did pretty bad. Wait, what's this? Why did this one do better? Is lying ever permissible? Maybe my audience wants to be able to lie. That's kind of messed up, but boy did that video perform well. What if I did the same thing instead of lying but said stealing? If that works, it'd be pretty messed up, but if it gets the views... How do we deal with the situation where the Israelites are told to plunder the Egyptians? Is this an example of God saying it's okay to steal as long as it's from the Egyptians or people that are enslaving you? Today we're going to be talking about this particular issue as well as discuss the second half of Exodus chapter 3 that we didn't get a chance to talk about in the last episode. Exodus chapter 3 verse 7 reads, "The Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and I have given heed to their cry because of their taskmasters, for I am aware of their sufferings. So I have come down to deliver them from the power of the Egyptians, and to bring them up from that land to a good and spacious land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanite and the Hittite and the Amorite and the Perizzite and the Hivite and the Jebusite. Now behold, the cry of the sons of Israel have come to me. Furthermore, I have seen the oppression with which the Egyptians are oppressing." So here we see that God tells Moses that he sees the affliction and hears the cry of the Israelites. And these are similar anthropomorphisms to what we read about at the end of Exodus chapter 2, where it says God heard, he remembered, he looked, he knew. And we discussed this a little bit in that episode. It's not that God didn't hear the Israelites before this point, or that he didn't see the Israelites before this point. It's just a way of describing God in a more personal way, attributing human characteristics to something that isn't human. Exodus chapter 3 verse 10 reads, "Therefore come now, I will send you to Pharaoh so that you may bring me my people, the sons of Israel, out of Egypt." But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh, and that I should bring the sons of Israel out of Egypt?" And he said, "Certainly I will be with you, and this shall be a sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God at this mountain."
It's also kind of weird that this paradise God plans to send them to is a place where all these other people live. Even if they get there, it means they're gonna invade a place that is already taken. Whenever you think about visiting paradise, it's probably not crowded, which means God may be rescuing them by sending them into a new war.
Okay, so here we go again. And if you didn't watch the last episode, there was an atheist who put out a video, and it's a critique really of Exodus chapter 3 and everything wrong with it, so to speak. And one of the things we did with that episode is kind of respond to a lot of his main points, and so I'm going to do a few of those in this episode as well. The freeing of the Hebrew slaves will radically impact the economy of Egypt, and this would very likely result in war between the Israelites and the Egyptians. In chapter 1 of Exodus, Pharaoh actually wanted all the male babies to be killed to supplant the strength and might of the Hebrew people and to keep them in slavery. Yes, the place they're going to will have people in it, and they'll actually have to conquer these people, and it will cost many lives because of their disobedience to God. The promised land was also settled in by wicked cultures that partook of things like child sacrifice, and part of the purpose in conquering these peoples in the promised land had a secondary effect where they would be punishing these cultures who engaged in depraved practices. Verse 13 says, "Then Moses said to God, Behold, I am going to the sons of Israel, and I will say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me to you. Now they may say to me, What is his name? What shall I say to them?" God said to Moses, "I am who I am." He said, "Thus shall you say to the sons of Israel, I am has sent me to you." God furthermore said to Moses, "Thus shall you say to the sons of Israel, The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial name to all generations."
Just say God. His name is God. Guess what? God's not going to say his name is God. This just turned into a weird who's on first situation. What's his name? I am. You are? No. I am. I am. Yes. No. I guess this is a good time to point out that many scholars say Yahweh is derived from the Hebrew phrase meaning I am. But I am sounds so much more arrogant.
What's interesting is that Moses anticipates that the Israelites will question his authority just like when he left Egypt. We actually see this in the next chapter as well. Moses is nervous to go back to the people who rejected him. Additionally, the Israelites were surrounded by many cultures who worshipped other gods, especially the Egyptian gods. And that's why when he asked God, "Who is it that is sending me?" God responds by saying that he is the God of his ancestors and that he is the I am. Now, is saying that he is the I am a statement of arrogance? No. To be truly arrogant requires you to think that you're greater than you actually are, and it's impossible for God to do this since he is infinite. But what exactly does God mean when he says I am? So one commentary writes, "What then is I am? The answer is not in evasion. I am what I am called." It's not a reluctant to disclose his name as though he said, "My name is really not the point." It's not a cutting short of Moses as though to say, "One thing at a time, I'm in charge here," and not a primitive shout of invocation. Each of these attempts to explaining the meaning violates some explicit aspect of this context. Instead of evading Moses or being reluctant, God takes the initiative in supplying his name, its meaning, and its past and future connections. Instead of interrupting Moses, God patiently responds directly to 4 repeated objections Moses makes. And instead of the shout originating with humans, it emanates from an unfolding of the character and being of God. So the early English Wycliffe Bible translates the I am as "He that is sent me to you." Clement of Alexandria from the late 2nd century writes, "Who alone is, who was, and is to come, and he alone is God." The context here is that the I am is the one who is the only true and living God. This passage also shows God's faithfulness as he ties his new name, I am, with Moses' ancestors. It shows God's immutability in that he has not changed. He is self-existent and eternal. This is where we get the famous tetragrammaton, which is derived from the name Yahweh. You take Yahweh and then you take the vowels out of it and you get 4 consonants, the Y, H, W, H. And again, this transliteration is known as the tetragrammaton. Tetragrammaton meaning 4 letters. And the reason why Yahweh was often shortened like this was because it was done by the scribes to prevent the misuse or disrespect to the sacred name of God. This YHWH is usually translated into English as Lord in all capital letters to show the difference between the divine name of God and Lord as in a position of power like a ruler or a governor. Verse 15 reads, God furthermore said to Moses, "Thus shall you say to the sons of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial name to all generations. Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has appeared to me, saying, I am indeed concerned about you and what has been done to you in Egypt. So I said, I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanite, and the Hittite, and the Amorite, and the Perizzite, and the Hivite, and the Jebusite, to a land flowing with milk and honey."
Do you really need to convince slaves to escape slavery by promising a land of milk and honey? I'm pretty sure they would have followed Moses if the promised land included Miller Lite and Splenda.
Obviously, the motivation to leave Egypt here is not the milk and honey. We aren't talking about unidimensional characters that are in a cartoon or something like that. These are people who had families, people who bled, sweat, and cried throughout their enslavement by the Egyptians. Milk and honey also doesn't merely mean milk and bee juice. It's a way of saying that there is agricultural richness and great possibility of economic wealth. This is significant because when Joseph's father, Israel, left the promised land to Egypt, it was during a severe famine. The Israelites undoubtedly wanted to be free from their captivity, but they would also want to go to a place that was going to be better than the place that they came. Now, obviously, freedom is much better than slavery, but you also want to go to a place where there is a promise of wealth, a promise where you can raise your family freely. And this is one of the main reasons why they ended up leaving Egypt. It was to be able to worship God freely, the ability to be free of their captors. And we see this throughout the book of Exodus as the story unfolds. Verse 18 reads, "They will pay heed to what you say, and you with the elders of Israel will come to the king of Egypt, and you will say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. So now please let us go 3 days' journey into the wilderness that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not permit you to go, except under compulsion. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with my miracles, which I shall do in the midst of it. And after that, he will let you go. I will grant this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And it shall be that when you go, you will not go empty-handed, but every woman shall ask of her neighbor, and the woman who lives in her house, articles of silver, articles of gold, and clothing, and you will put them on your sons and daughters. Thus you will plunder the Egyptians.
So this entire escape plan involves lying to the king of Egypt, then hoping God succeeds with his magic tricks? Not exactly airtight. Also, a 3-day journey. Remember that one. That one's not gonna age well. And if God has the power to strike the Egyptians, why not just strike them dead? Don't show them wonders. Just tase them for a bit so everyone can run away. Notice that he says he's gonna perform wonders to convince the Egyptians to let the Israelites go. That sounds so hopeful, so innocent. You're about to find out that those wonders are more like torture scene after torture scene.
Our atheist friend here is making the same mistakes over and over and over again. We touched on miracles versus magic tricks in the last video, so I'm not going to spend any time on it here. He also mentions that it's a 3-day journey from Egypt to the Promised Land, but implies that the rest of Exodus in the narrative is false because it ends up taking 40 years. He doesn't miss, but rather he avoids the fact that the whole point of this 40-year wandering in the desert was very clearly a punishment by God. It was on purpose, and we will cover that more when we get to there. Later in his video, he basically equates the plagues to torture, which at first glance, some of the plagues are pretty serious, but we'll address these issues as the story progresses. But I would like to remind you that Exodus is really a story of choice. Moses was given the choice to go back to Egypt. The Israelites are given the choice to leave with Moses. The Pharaoh is even given the choice to allow the Israelites to leave or not. Then, when the Israelites eventually do leave, the Israelites are given the choice to obey God or follow their own desires, and it leads them to 40 years in the wilderness. Yes, those who willingly choose to go against God will face severe consequences and judgment. However, God gives all of these people many chances to repent. He also makes it very obvious that he's serious about bringing the Israelites out of Egypt. Yet Pharaoh continually hardens his heart. And eventually, it says that God hardens his heart. But we're going to talk about this more when we get there. Now, what about the plundering of the Egyptians? We read in the passage where it says they will give them articles of wealth and clothing by their own free will. Is this free will at the end of the spear or at the end of the sword? No. So when you read it, it says every woman, not a man, every woman shall ask of her neighbor. Does that sound like an armed robbery or really anything of the sort? No. So Exodus chapter 12 continues to provide some insight into this passage, saying, "Now the sons of Israel had done according to the word of Moses, for they had requested from the Egyptians articles of silver and articles of gold and clothing. And the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they let him have their request. Thus, they plundered the Egyptians." Here, we see that plunder doesn't mean rob or steal. The King James Version renders the word plunder as borrow, but this also is incorrect because to borrow implies that you will one day return those belongings. It's a little off topic, but it's also interesting that some of the Egyptians actually went along with the Israelites. In verse 38, it says, "A mixed multitude also went up with them, along with the flocks and herds and a very large number of livestock. This mixed multitude very likely included Egyptians, further demonstrating the free choice that God gives to the Jewish people, to the Egyptians, to Moses, and even us today."
Oh, sweet! God's helping them loot Egypt before they leave. Because if there's one thing I've learned from Christians, it's that God won't do anything unless money is involved. The prosperity gospel is older than we ever knew. Look at God. In a while, he's gonna say stealing is forbidden. But the rule is literally not written in stone yet. So God's like, here's how we're gonna take everything they've got. I know we're at the end of this chapter, but I just want to remind you that God is still inside of a bush. The question now is whether Moses accepts this plan and will carry it out. I mean, if a burning bush told me to do something, I'd probably listen too. Though a more realistic version of this story would just have Moses waking up from his delusions and hopefully checking into rehab.
The prosperity gospel believes that when you become a Christian, God will bless you with good health and increase your wealth. This is a false gospel. It's antithetical to the teachings of Jesus and Scripture, and additionally, it has nothing to do with this passage, but it makes for a nice straw man. Jokes aside, the last sentence of the atheist video where he says, a more realistic version of this story would just have Moses waking up from his delusions and hopefully checking into rehab. Would even this atheist believe in God if he saw the things that Moses saw? Absolutely not. And it's like I said before in the last video where I spoke about divine hiddenness. God knows the best way to reveal himself to each and every one of us. And he has knowledge of every possible future and knows what will give people the best evidence to believe in him without overriding their free will. But never assume that people will choose the rational option, even when they're presented with the proper evidence. Everyone has a choice. What we do with that choice is the most important thing about us. As we wrap up here, I probably won't be posting a video for a while since I'm going to be taking about a month off as I'm going through a little bit of a transition right now, in a good way, which I realize that sounds about as vague as like a Bethel prophecy or something like that. But if anything changes, I'll post an update in the community tab. As always, thanks for watching.